morning, everybody. Are you guys ready for part 2 of the Casey's Nickelodeon's murders? I am. Stay tuned. Hi, good morning, everybody. Crafting Journey here. That Journey chick over on Instagram. Check out my Instagram page. Hey, guys. Woohoo, I'm crocheting. Now, I have, this is going to be like one of those, it's called a 10-row cowl. It's like a cowl, it's going to wrap around. And if you make it 20 rows, you can actually put it over your head. So I'm going to see what it looks like after 10 rows. This is, 1, 2, 3. I'm on row 4, but it's a super easy stitch. The pattern was sent to me. It's a YouTube video that was sent to me by Narrate, one of my subscribers. And she said she's done lots of these, and it really is super simple. Like, if you want that, let me know, and I will send it to you, the video. So, good morning, and I am going to update you today on the Idaho student murders. Yep. So I did a little bit more diamond painting yesterday. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'm a little bit farther in on that black hole that's behind the door down in the corner. So let's talk about what happened yesterday, because of course it was even on the nightly news last night. Brian Kohlberger, the main suspect in this case, well, the only suspect at this point that we're aware of, he was, as you guys know, apprehended in Pennsylvania at the home of his parents and taken into custody, and yesterday afternoon had an extradition hearing. So during this 20-minute hearing, the judge, female judge, she just said, listen, he waived his right to extradition from Pennsylvania back to Idaho. And she just said, are you making this decision freely and voluntarily? It's a whole litany that the judge has to go through whenever a defendant makes, a really big decision like this. So, are you happy with the representation that you have? He had a public defender, and he acknowledged each of these statements, that he was not suffering from any mental disease or defect, that he was not on any medication. All of those things were covered, and that was it. No cameras were allowed in the courtroom, no tweeting, no text messaging. Like, if you got caught doing any of that, you'd get thrown out and probably worse, contempt of court. So none of that was going on. There were reporters in the courtroom. There was about seating for about 200 people. So we know what happened inside the courtroom from reporters who sat through that hearing. So what you saw on the nightly news and all the other channels and court TV and law and crime and everything was just Brian Kohlberger entering the courtroom in a red scrubs. I like the color red on it, I think it's better than orange, don't you? Like, if you had a choice, I'll take the red. Pink for me. I want hot pink. Yeah, just saying. So, we see him going in and out of the courtroom. So what the judge did was sign off on the extradition back to Idaho and gave the law enforcement 10 days to accomplish this. So after this hearing, the law enforcement from Pennsylvania holds a press conference. And what we learned during this press conference is that here is how this all went down. They were contacted by Idaho police, Moscow County Police in Idaho, and they were privileged they know what's in the probable cause affidavit. The defendant does not. Brian Kohlberger has no idea what's in this probable cause affidavit. So they were asked to assist in the apprehension of Brian Kohlberger. So what they did was they surveilled him for a few days. So for a period of time. So they surveilled him, and then they brought in a specialized apprehension team, and I don't remember the name of what they called it, but volunteer people that are in law enforcement, and they're part of this special team with specialized training and how to apprehend people, so that there's the least amount of risk to themselves and risk to the people that are maybe with the defendant, in this case his family. So what they did was they went in under the cover of darkness. They waited till it was dark outside, and they broke in. They broke into his family's home, busted out several windows, get inside his home, and they apprehend him. I don't know why they didn't just knock on the door. I don't know. Whatever. We also know from body cam footage that Brian Kohlberger and his father flew over to Idaho and then drove in the white Hyundai Elantra from Idaho back to Pennsylvania for the holidays. He had only been in Idaho for one semester. He had completed one semester in his PhD program. Then his father comes and gets him. They drive back. They're pulled over a couple of times. I don't know what for, but they're on video camera, body camera footage of them getting pulled over. Perhaps because they're in a white Hyundai Elantra that the entire country is looking for in connection with these murders. Now, why he wasn't apprehended during these stops, I have no idea. Why they let him get all the way back to Pennsylvania. You know, if his family wanted him home for the holidays, why didn't they just fly him home? Why go get him with the Hyundai that everybody's looking for and bring it home? That's one question that I have. Okay, so what else occurred here? Apprehended, broken window. Okay, so we do not know when in this next 10 days this defendant will get escorted back to Idaho. We don't know how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and we likely never will, because late last night, about 9 o'clock last night, a magistrate back in Moscow, Idaho, issued a gag order. So no one related to this case, no investigator, no attorney, nobody that's related to this case can talk about it. No. So are we ever going to find out what's in this probable cause affidavit? Idaho has this rule that says they can't release it's sealed. They cannot release the contents of this probable cause affidavit until the defendant is returned to Idaho and actually is served with the warrant or whatever it is, And that we don't know if that's happened yet. Now, during this press conference, the Pennsylvania police personnel said likely was not going to happen that night. Who knows? That they were making the arrangements at the present time. But they're not going to tell us when and where, because it's not going to happen. So sometime over the next 10 days, he's going to be transported somehow from Pennsylvania back to Idaho. But there's a gag order. He'll get served with the warrant. He'll know what's in the probable cause affidavit, but nobody's allowed to talk about it. So are we going to ever hear what's in this probable cause affidavit? Now, I don't think this enjoins the family from speaking about it, the victim's family. And then there's always, leaks in the system. So I don't know where this goes from here. I don't know if we're going to learn when he arrives back in Idaho, when we're going to learn, or when we're going to hear the contents of this probable cause affidavit. Yeah. So we just have to stay tuned. But in the meantime, do you know there are 20 more days until the trial? of Alex Murdaugh. Alex Murdaugh, for the killing of his wife and son in South Carolina. Now, if you don't know anything about that, then go back and look at some of my Murdaugh Monday videos and where I talk about it. But Alex Murdaugh is, right now he's in custody for very near 100 different charges, many of which are financial, but the criminal charges that he's facing are the brutal murders of his wife and son, both shot to death at their Moselle home, which was like their hunting lodge in South Carolina, and where they stored their dogs, and they were out at the kennels. The mom and son were out at the kennels, and they were both shot, but with different weapons. But they, I really don't, I think Alex is behind those murders, but I don't know that he committed the murders. And he may have been present during the murders, but I think he had help of some kind. I just get that feeling, but we'll find out in 20 days if this thing actually does go to trial. My sense is that the closer we get to it, the more likely it is that there'll be a continuance. This is the first time up on the docket, so we'll see. We shall see. So let's talk about part 2 of the Casey's Nickelodeon murders. I hope you enjoyed part 1 yesterday, where we talked about the actual murders of Casimir Sukarovsky, also known as Butch Casey, who was the proprietor of Casey's Nickelodeon, a bar, an after-hours bar in South Florida, back in 1994, June of 1994. He and 2 young ladies, Marie Rogers and Sharon, let me find her name, sorry about that, Sharon Anderson, are shot and killed in his home. He invites them, they come to his restaurant, he invites them after it closes. This is an after-hours restaurant, so it closed really, really early in the morning, and he invites them back to his place for drinks. Within an hour of them getting to this house, they're sitting at the dining room table, they're conversing, they're having drinks, and 2 intruders break in, shoot them in the head. There's 22 minutes captured on a video, but Casey had his house under surveillance, which was a very unusual thing in 1994. And the video, as it turns out, was not good. Black and white. The police actually enlisted the FBI and NASA to help them enhance this video so they could try to figure out who these 2 intruders were. One of the intruders had his face covered, but at some point during this 22-minute terrorizing that they do of these victims, he takes the mask off. The other guy had a baseball cap and sunglasses. So they put out a still picture of these guys, and in Miami-Dade County, a police officer recognizes these guys from the flyer, and he calls the Miramar Police Department, who's investigating the murders, and says, hey, or BSO. I don't know who actually did the investigation, if it was Broward Sheriff's Office or the Miramar Police Department. But in any case, Miami-Dade County, they call and they say, hey, we had a home invasion down here in Miami-Dade, and we picked up these 3 guys, and one of them looks kind of like this flyer that you've put out. You might want to come down and talk to him. So this is a month after the murders have occurred. They've put out, they're trying to figure it out this whole month. Who are these guys in this video? So one of the investigators goes down, and he sits down with Butch. He sits down with Pablo Ibar, and he interviews Pablo, and he says, where were you the night of, June 25th or 26th, whatever it was, 26th. And he says, I was out clubbing. And he said, and what about after that? And he says, well, then I was with my girlfriend Tasha. Well, what's Tasha's last name? I don't know. What's her phone number? I don't know. Where does she live? I don't know. I don't know if they ever found Tasha, but in any case, it was clear they weren't getting any information from this guy. So he shows Pablo the picture that he has from the video. And he says, so if you were out clubbing and you were with your girlfriend, how come I have this picture of you? And Pablo looks at the picture and then just kind of stares at it and then puts his head down on the table. Yeah. So let me tell you about why they picked up Pablo in the first place in Miami-Dade. They had a very, very similar home invasion that had just occurred in July. This was after the murders of Butch Casey and the women. So in this murder, or in this home invasion, someone knocks on this woman's door and identifies themselves as Alex and Alex Rodriguez. And she knows Alex Rodriguez, so she lets him in. But when she opens the door, he comes in with a weapon, a machine gun, not a machine gun, but a shotgun. I don't do guns, so he comes in with a shotgun. Another guy, Alberto Rincon, he comes in and he is carrying a stick. Sound familiar? Yeah. And behind him is Pablo Ibar. He comes in and he's got a pistol. So they start terrorizing the people that are in this house, threatening to kill them, asking them for money, saying you owe us money for drugs, ransacking the house, using stuff that's in the house to tie them up. As you'll recall, in the case, the Butch Casey home invasion, they tied up Sharon Anderson's feet with phone cords. So in this case, they were using belts and phone cords and tying everybody up. At one point, they had one of the women was face down and she was pregnant. She said, I'm very uncomfortable. Can I turn over? I'm pregnant. And she said that Pablo Ibar actually went into the kitchen and said, oh, you're pregnant. You want to have a baby now? And he threatened to cut the baby out of her. He went in the kitchen, got a knife, threatened to cut the baby out of her. Obviously did not do that, but to show how serious they were about their murder threats, they shot and killed the family dog. Meanwhile, one of the victims was hiding in the bathroom. I don't think they knew that. I don't think they knew this. And he calls 911. And the police, meanwhile, they're outside, they're cordoning off the neighborhood, and they catch all these guys, including Alex Rodriguez, Alberto Rincon, and Pablo Ibar. Now Pablo, he says, well, I wasn't even supposed to be there. Well, they called me, Alex called me, said they had run out of gas. And so I came from Broward, where, they lived in this flop house in Hollywood, Florida. And he says, I came from Broward with, a gas can to help them out. And lo and behold, there was a gas can, similar to the Butch Casey murders, where there was a gas can brought where they burned out the Mercedes. So very, very similar. So now, not only are they looking at Pablo Ibar, but they're looking at these other two guys, Alex and Alberto. But they don't really resemble the photo, the other guy in the photo. So they get a hold of a former roommate of Pablo Ibar. His name is John Clemesco. And he agrees to speak with them. And he says, he looks at the photos and he said, that's Pablo Ibar. And the other guy, his name is Seth Pentlover. And he even spells how's that spelled? Pentlover. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't Seth Penlover. It was a guy named Seth um, Penalver, Penalver, not Pentlover. But he was so sure of it, he even spelled it Pentlover. That's him. That's him. He was also, he wasn't a roommate of ours, but he would frequent our home. You know, when we lived there, he would frequent our home. So now they're on to the second guy. So they actually put out to the media. They said, you know, we're looking for this guy Seth. They figure out it's Penalver that he's talking about, not Pentlover, but it does cause a lot of problems in the trials that are coming up. This discrepancy in the name. So in any case, they put it out there that he is a person of interest and they would like to speak to him. So Seth sees this, and you know, this is according to Seth's girlfriend, who he was actually living with at the time of his arrest. She is interviewed, and she also is shown these photos of Pablo and Seth, and she identifies me. Yeah, that's Pablo, that's Seth. Now later on, she recants, and she said, no, the police forced me to say that was Pablo and Seth. They said if this was, and it was all off the recording, because we have a recorded statement that she's identifying Pablo and Seth. But before the recording was started, she said, they asked her, you know, just suppose this was Pablo and Pablo and Seth, which one would be Pablo, which one would be Seth? And then they start the recording, and that's when she said, this one is Pablo, this one is Seth. This is her story. It's an interesting story. In any case, she said Seth freaked out when he learned he was wanted as a person of interest, that he threatened to kill himself, that, you know, his life was going to be over. And she said, well, you know, did you do these murders? And he said, no, I didn't. So he goes and he turns himself in. And we learn much later in this story that one of the many juries that hears this case does acquit him later on. But that's down the road a piece. So let's go back to the Miami-Dade County home invasion. So when the investigating officer goes down to interview Pablo Ibar, they had found at the Butch Casey crime scene with the two women a bloody footprint. So when this officer goes down to Miami-Dade, he collects the shoes that these three men are wearing, sends them off to a lab, and the pair of shoes that Alberto Recon was wearing matched the bloody footprint at the crime scene of Butch Casey. But when Alberto was asked about it, he said, those were Pablo's shoes. I borrowed them. And according to the roommate, John Clemesco, these roommates would all, you know, they would share clothing, and you know, if the shoe fits, they would wear them. You know, so that's not an unusual thing for that to have happened, that someone else would have on Pablo's shoes. Interesting. Now, this same roommate says that he saw Pablo and Seth leaving that night, the night of the murders. And when they returned home, they had so he looked out the window. He said he had kind of woken up, so he doesn't know if he was seeing things clearly, but he saw Pablo and Seth, and they had Pablo's burgundy colored car and a dark luxury car, likely the Mercedes, and that they returned home very early that morning. And then they both got into the Mercedes, or the dark luxury car, and then they left. Now that was something that I found kind of interesting, was, you know, they had this witness, the neighbor, who his name was Gary Foy, Gary, when he saw that this was being investigated, the murders were being investigated, he goes over and he talks to one of the investigators, and he said, listen, yesterday morning, I saw two men in the Mercedes backing out of the driveway. And he is the gentleman I talked about yesterday who identified one of the Polaroids that was taken by one of the investigating officers as Pablo Ibar. So he is the one that says he needs to see them in a lineup, that he thinks he could identify them better if it's a lineup. And when they actually do a lineup versus a Polaroid, he's actually to definitively say, oh yeah, Pablo, that's Pablo. That's the guy I saw. He was a passenger in that Mercedes. Now, here's my question. They took off in this Mercedes. How did they get there? They must have got there with the burgundy vehicle that belonged to Pablo Ibar. Did they go back and get Pablo's car at some? Yeah, there's some things that don't add up about that witness's statement. So I'm not sure about that. Unless they went, it doesn't make sense. Did they go back to the crime scene and I don't know. Because according to the roommate, they brought both vehicles home and then left in the Mercedes. But then drove it 90 miles away to Palm Beach County, Belle Glade, set it on fire. How'd they get back? Makes no sense. In any case, so going back to Seth's girlfriend, she says that the night of the murders, or the morning of the murders, she had gone with some coworkers after they got done working at a place called Pickles. They had gone to Casey's Nickelodeon, and she ran into Seth and Pablo at Casey's Nickelodeon. Right around the, last call is when she saw them leave, which would have been like 6 a.m., 5:30, 6 a.m. If that's when last call was. I'm not sure when last call was. She said she saw them enter the bar around 5:30 a.m., and then they left right after our last call. So if they followed Butch Casey and these two women to Butch's house, then they must have done it in the burgundy vehicle. And we don't ever get this burgundy vehicle identified. Meanwhile, the police think they've got enough information now. They've got enough witnesses. They've got enough information to try this case. The prosecutor, he's confident that they've got the right people, Seth and Pablo Ibar. So they go to trial. Now, what the jury does not get to hear is about the home invasion in Miami-Dade County. They don't hear any of that. So all they hear is these witnesses that, are kind of so. So this jury deliberates for 25 hours. That's a long time. And they finally come back and they're like, we're hung, So the first trial is declared a mistrial, hung jury. And as it will turn out, this is the first of many trials. So I'm going to come back tomorrow with part 3, because there's more. People are going to change their stories. Things are going to happen. Yep. All right. So we'll come back to this tomorrow. Interesting. Did John, the roommate, Clemesco, have a reason to be offering all this information about his roommates? Was he holding a grudge against Pablo Ibar? We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Yep. Right after, hopefully I'll have more done on this scarf. Yep. So what's on our little calendar for today? Our crime calendar. It's about a zombie book. Now, I am not into these zombie things. I really am not. But in 1995, there was a novel called Zombie. Let's just take that off and I'll read it. In the story of newly paroled sex offender Quentin P. This is not a book I would have read. Quentin P., who longs to make a docile and mindless companion out of an attractive young man. He abducts, rapes, and tortures young men, performing crude surgeries on their brains in an attempt to create his zombie. But one after another they die. Soon he is killing just for the joy he gets from it. Remind you of anyone? Quentin P. and his exploits are based on Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal who similarly abducted and raped young men, many of whom he subjected to improvised brain surgeries and injections. The novel was published the year after Dahmer was killed in prison. Gross. Sorry. Okay. I didn't like that one. Yeah. I don't like zombie shows, movies. Like, what was that show everybody was watching with the zombies? I hated it. I watched some of it. Like, there were a few, like, the first couple of seasons was just okay. You know, it was okay. I watched it. But then it got really gruesome in, like, season 3. What was the name of that show? The Walking Dead. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And then they had, like, spin-offs of it. No. I'm not a zombie person. But I didn't realize that all that stuff with Jeffrey Dahmer. Frankly, I just didn't know that much about Jeffrey Dahmer, but interesting. Very interesting. All right, guys. So tonight I'm going to be live at 6:30 p.m. I'm going to try to get out my watercolors. It's not a hard thing to do. It's just I haven't done it in a while. So I'm going to get out the watercolors. And you know, when I'm watercoloring, I kind of like, it's sort of zen for me. So please come, please watch. We'll chit chat and you'll get to see my watercolors. So have a great day. If I don't see you tonight, I'll see you tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily. Take care, everybody. Bye.